Greetings and welcome to the How We Do Digital Ministry podcast. I'm Christopher Harris, founder of Faith Growth. You can find us at faithgrowth.com, where we help our church clients build their digital presence and engage with their communities online. On this podcast, I have a conversation with a church leader, and I ask them to share how they do digital ministry in their community. Today, I'm talking with Pastor Ernie Hinojosa, of Rejoice Lutheran Church in Coppell, Texas. Ernie, please introduce yourself and tell us how you do digital ministry.
Well, first of all, Chris, thanks for having me. And I think it's extremely timely, obviously, that you're bringing this podcast to folks near and far. You ask, by the way, I am senior pastor of Rejoice Lutheran Church in Coppell, Texas. I have served there. This is my 8th year. In fact, August 1 will be 8 years, which is hard for me to believe. It seems like I just got here. But anyhow, it's been a great 8 years, and obviously it's been a challenging 8 years, especially this most recent year. You ask, how do we do digital ministry? Well, I can tell you it was an inauspicious beginning. Literally last year on a weekend in March, we've been hearing, like a lot of people watching this, like all week long, that there were closures and limitations and the rules that seemed like were being changed every day. In fact, for a while they were. And we could not decide, are we going to have church inside? Are we not going to have church in person? And I think, Chris, we finally figured out on a Friday late afternoon that we were not going to do it. We were going to have to go virtual. And we had less than 48 hours to figure out how to do that because we had never done that before. Now, I know a lot of other churches have, but I think there's also probably more churches like ours where it was one of these things that we knew was probably something we needed to do. But Chris, it's one of those things like it always seems like not so urgent, right? It's important and we'll get around to it eventually.
There's time to do that tomorrow. Yeah,
exactly. It just never made it right onto this week's to-do list. Well, it went to the top of the list like for everybody else. And in fact, you're looking behind me. This is my home office upstairs at my home. And in fact, for the first, I want to say 4 to 6 weeks, we set up cameras and we literally did worship from here. Right behind me is a television screen you can probably see. We used that for our slides and visual pieces. And I have my guitar. I play guitar and a couple people come help me out. So, man, I'm telling you, talk about learning on the fly.
Yeah.
It's been crazy.
So it was you, like most churches, were learning on the fly. What are, I've heard many churches, the experience, even though it's been crazy just because you were learning on the fly, there's been some really positive aspects. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind from this last year where you saw the presence of God in your digital ministry?
Oh, well, absolutely, Chris. I think it was a surprise to us that we expected our own people to find us. And we've been using primarily Facebook Live as our platform. We looked at several platforms and that one just seemed to work the best for us. So we were expecting our people would find us and they did. But what the real surprise, of course, was for a lot of our churches is how many people who were not part of our congregation over the course of several weeks started to tune in. And we knew that using the data that we get, the analytics data that we get. So we knew people were tuning in, and it turns out there were people who had heard of us from family and friends. And in fact, we had people who had been members with us years ago and maybe moved out of state or just were not in the local area. So that was, that was really awesome to know that really what was happening is God opened a door for what we're really calling we have a digital congregation now, which we never thought we would, and we didn't expect that. But really, that's a huge thing to be able to communicate and connect with people all over. And so that was a great surprise in a good way.
Cool. I like that you're even naming it as this is a part of us, this digital congregation. It's not just, hey, we got some people that show up. No, it's part of our congregation. I like that. I think that's important as we try to figure out how we're moving forward, that we name it.
Yeah. Well, really, in fact, because, and of course, it's not all been terrific, like how to connect with people, how do we identify people? You know, as a church, our mission is to grow disciples of Jesus who reproduce, basically, right? It's disciples who make disciples of Jesus. So what Jesus in Matthew 28 told his disciples, right? Go make disciples. So, you know, the fundamental purpose of the church hasn't changed, but man, and I think we probably do a pretty good job of helping people grow in faith and discipleship locally. I think we've been good at that, but how to do that digitally with somebody who's not present, and how do we even identify who these people are? And because you can't develop a connection with them if you don't know who they are, right?
Exactly.
So man, I tell you, we've been down some rabbit holes trying to figure that one out. It turns out a lot of people are asking that question. And to be frank, I don't know that I've heard a really good answer to that. There may be some platforms that emerge that make that a bit more available, but right now it's tough. But it's just been figuring out, like, how do you make disciples and connect in meaningful ways with people who are not in your local area? So they're not just tuning in like watching TV as spectators, right? How do you build relationship with people in that? And you know, I got to tell you, Chris, we're experimenting and trying stuff. I don't think we're anywhere near where we want to be, but you know, the progress has been slow, but it has been fun to watch.
Well, I also like that, you know, you talk about the technology is enabling you to reach new people, but that it's still an outgrowth of the original mission. The mission has not changed. The mission is the same. It's just you now have a new way to connect with people. I think that's kind of important to remember, because sometimes we get a little too, sometimes we can get a little too caught up in the technology for technology's sake, but it really is the mission that drives it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Like we talk about it as, I mean, I'm the senior leader of our church. So, you know, part of my job is to help set the compass for the church going forward. So this year, really our emphasis is becoming a hybrid congregation, a hybrid church, which is language a lot of people are using, and it wasn't original to us, but it's still right. How are we growing disciples locally? How are we growing disciples digitally? And we understand that's the call. We have not figured that out, but I'm excited by the possibility of what God might do.
Yeah. Well, no, and I like that, you know, since you're setting that vision and the compass, as you said, you know, I was reading an article yesterday about, you know, a pastor kind of saying, you know, we don't want to go back. I mean, we have to kind of look forward of where are we being called. And I think, you know, you're setting that expectation that we don't know exactly what this is going to look like, but we know it's going to be different. And so we're going to work together and discern together and try to build this where God's calling us. And I think that's wise as well. And not just, okay, we had all these committees and all these activities, let's just start them all up again, you know.
Well, you know, the good news is God's growing a new church, and the bad news is God's growing a new church, right? And I mean, it's pushing us and challenging us. You know, that the good part is we're connecting with new people, right? The hard part is having to figure out. So we almost had to reinvent everything overnight and doing it badly over and over until we figure some things out. And I'll say what's emerging isn't for everybody. It really is becoming something different. And of course, we're praying and hoping that our folks, particularly local folks, will, you know, stay with us and keep moving forward. But I can see already this is a challenge, and where we have to make change, there's always loss, and where there's loss, there's grief. So that's a huge challenge for all of us in the church world who are leaders, because we're all having to embrace change, and that means there's a lot of grief going on right now.
Well, that's I think that's a very good point. And also, you know, I know specifically that your congregation, as congregations go, is not even that old, you know, but there's still a lot for them to mourn, because I believe it was started in the 1990s or 80s. Is that correct?
Yeah, man, we're coming up on our 30th anniversary. I guess we're at 28 years. So yeah, you know, that's not very old for church.
And so, yeah, but this is such a significant change that it's not, that it's still Well, I guess that's for everybody, but I'm just kind of thinking, because I think sometimes I hear about the churches that are like 80, 100 years old, and like you get that they're entrenched in their ways. But even churches that are 25, 30 years old are probably very.
Well, brother, a church that's 5 years old can get stuck in their ways. Okay. There's this saying that says, hey, if you do it the same twice, it becomes a tradition.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
we just get into those and that's a good thing. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Things that serve us well, things that serve the mission of the church, that help people grow in faith, like that's all good. But unfortunately, there's probably going to be some really good things that we're going to have to let go of in order to pursue what's coming up. And of course, part of the challenge of that, especially, is we don't even know exactly what that is yet. We just know it's coming.
Well, and I think you said something important that a minute ago, like, when we started badly, but we started. And I think that's a theme that I'm hearing over and over as I talk with churches, is like, as we're going more and more digital, we don't know what it looks like yet. And so we just kind of have to start. And, we basically come up with a hypothesis, try it. Did it work? Good. How can we make it better? And kind of, just keep iterating, because there really isn't a good model yet. That's one of the reasons I started the podcast here, is how can we learn from each other? Because I think it's going to be a lot of time of just trying different things. So wanting to see what churches are doing. But you got to start, I guess, is kind of what I think. You have to start somewhere and just try, even if it's ugly at the beginning.
Well, man, it's coming, right? So either you embrace the change and lean into it. You can fight against it if you want. Mm-hmm. It doesn't go well. I think what it does is it helps to relieve some of the short-term anxiety because you're keeping things the same. Mm-hmm. But in the long run, it doesn't really serve us. And so, that's a conversation we're having now. Like, what are the things that are fundamental to who we are that are unchanging, right? Yeah. And then we want to hold on to those things. What are the things that are fundamental, but we probably should look at them a bit differently and tweak them? And frankly, what are some of the things that have meant a lot to us, but we're just going to have to let go completely? So just even having that conversation and then deciding what goes in which category can be difficult too. And this is going to be happening for years. So this is not something we have to figure out today, but it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an important process, and I think y'all are wise to at least be asking the questions, because, there's probably just a lot of people in our pews, if not some of our leaders of churches, that are just really, they have it in their head, rightly or wrongly, that, by the summer, everybody's vaccinated and it just goes back to the way it was. And there really is no back to the way it was, because we had that experience. We're coming out because we've had the experience of this pandemic, we're going to come out on the other side different. And yeah. So I think it's important.
Part of that too, Chris, is we're coming out of this thing tired.
Yes.
Even when, and I have some great people on our staff and great leaders who've done amazing work. They really have. And I'm so grateful for them. But man, when you're having to rethink and reorient and pivot, right? And you think, okay, we're going to make this shift and then it's going to stay that way for a while, but then it doesn't. And you have to move it again and you have to it just wears on you, brother. It gets tiring. Plus we're all dealing with our own normal kinds of disruptions at home with our spouses, our kids, whatever, right? So we got all that baggage like everybody else. And then of course, people in the marketplace having to deal with different changes in their work. So, that's another piece here is we're being challenged to orient and to innovate at a time when a lot of us don't have a lot of juice in the tank, right? Like we're already kind of tired. And, you don't want to be tired when you're birthing something new, but we don't have a choice, right? So that's kind of where we find ourselves. And I bet a lot of the people watching this would probably shake their head and go, yeah, that's us too. And some of the best leaders I know, it's not about good or bad. It just is, right? Yeah. We're in this and it takes a toll on people.
Yeah, it's just been a while. Well, not even, to that end, I even sometimes wonder how can we even use technology to help each other out in that, because I was talking with a synod yesterday where they've been, they just ask everybody if they were recording sermons anyways, would they upload them to a shared Google Drive so, pastors could take a week off, could literally kind of go grab a sermon and take a week off, And I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to work together. The technology makes it a lot easier for us to work together than it has been, individual congregations, to work together in ways that just weren't possible before.
Oh, no question. Yeah.
Hopefully that might help with some of this, because the burnout is real right now. We're just all, yes. And that's,
well, and when we're already out of 8 out of 10 on the anxiety scale, it just doesn't take much, right, to send you kind of off the rails.
Yeah.
And frankly, we've had to talk about that in an honest way with our leaders and staff, and just to say, look, everybody I'm encountering right now is pretty much walking wounded at some level. Like nobody is functioning at 100%. We're all impaired, just not everyone's impaired to the same degree, right?
Yeah.
So just having a lot of grace and just forgiving one another when we're not our best self in a conversation, and we just have to know that, and again, just ask forgiveness and give grace to other people, because we're just it gets tiring. I get when we hit this 1 year mark, man, it's like I hit a wall. I've done pretty well, but at about the 1 year mark, I had just had enough, and have just had to lean on some people, some of my colleagues and other friends, because it doesn't stop. In fact, now, like a lot of churches, we had some water damage from the deep freeze, and we're just finally finishing getting the construction back. So a lot of people are way ahead of us. We haven't even come back into the sanctuary to worship yet. So It's still all digital. Now, we do have a backyard, a beautiful backyard. So we've been doing outdoor worship on Sunday at 12:30, and that's been good, right? Because you're together. But still, like we're behind the curve compared to a lot of churches. I know a lot of your viewers have probably been reconvening in the sanctuary for worship for months now. We're just now going to get into that in May. So again, we're behind the curve in that way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I will say it's been all over the map, though. Just it really depends on the part of the country. But especially since we're both, just so our listeners know, we're both in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Right. And the freeze that he referred to was the big hard freeze where we lost electricity in Texas back in January. Feeling burned out, natural, and I think your counsel is wise that we have to give a lot of grace and ask for forgiveness. But as feeling kind of tired right now, what's giving you hope as you look forward?
Oh my gosh! Well, first of all, I have people that I work with on our staff and just key leaders have been such champs, right? Sometimes you don't really know the kind of team you have until you're down, right? Like when things are against you and it's very difficult. So I've been really, what's hopeful to me is to see how resilient our people are and how resilient our staff is. We have some fantastic people that I get to work with. And so that's been a great joy. And it's not for everybody. There are certainly people that have had a struggle through it, but nevertheless, just to see the blessing of the people that I get to work with, and the Lord shows up in unexpected ways. When we actually got to invite into membership our first persons who aren't anywhere near local, and they're members of Rejoice Lutheran Church. Like, that blows my mind. I never even thought that would ever happen, but it has. And so that's a great thing. And the Lord shows up when I come in, and what's required of me is a 10, and I basically bring a 3 or a 4 on a good day. To see the way the Lord steps into that space and bears us up, and bears me up. There are days I just don't know. I'm in over my head big time. And just to see the Lord kind of help us bring what we need at the right time and the right people is, it gives me hope.
I like that. The Lord shows up. There's a bit of wisdom for the last year. The Lord shows up.
In the midst of our weakness, right? As Paul says, right? Yeah. Is when I am weak, then I am strong. Because I got nothing. And so when something good happens here, it's because the Lord stepped in and did a work, right? I can't take credit for that. Our people don't take credit for that. And we're regularly asking each other, like, where are we seeing the wins and how are we giving God glory for that? Because and it's fun to see the Lord showing up over and over again.
It's good. Yeah, well, and I think it's important also, like you just said, taking time to see where are those wins. I mean, that's like even with my team, that's where we start every week on our weekly phone call. What are the wins or celebrations we have this week? And very important.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm also so glad that we're getting vaccinated and starting to have more in-person stuff. In fact, Chris, before we started recording, you mentioned about sometimes going to conferences or other gatherings. And sometimes the most important, fruitful conversation you're going to have isn't something that happens in the main auditorium, right? It happens out in the hall or over lunch or a cup of coffee, right? That's where some of the most powerful stuff. And frankly, that dimension of our life together in a lot of ways has just, right? It basically disappeared.
Yes.
And I'm hungry for that. And our people are hungry for that. So as we are moving back into in person, there's definitely a perceived need for and desire for community. And I'm looking forward to embracing that more fully going forward.
That's cool. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. What's bringing you hope, and being kind of very open there. I appreciate that. Some wise words for us today as far as where to find hope in all this, and what to be looking forward to. Specifically what you said, the Lord shows up, and then kind of making sure that we're with our communities, and honestly, getting back.
We need each other, man.
Exactly.
We've been missing each other. And this is not, of course, I have to be careful when I say stuff like that, because then it makes it suggest like our digital connections are like, the B team, or they're not as important. They are important, but they're just different. So
exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and kind of play off that, what does church community look like when it's not based around geography and, your church located at the crossroads of, 2 streets or whatever?
Sure.
What does that look like?
Well, a lot of it's, unfortunately, use a lot of Zoom. People use other platforms, man. I was talking to a colleague of mine who was saying, this week we're having a Zoom meeting with our staff to talk about Zoom fatigue. I thought, that's rich.
Yes.
Right. Zoom was awesome at the front end. I think everybody was excited, but it got old fast. So I think clearly one of the challenges we're finding is people who are capable and familiar with Zoom, a lot of people are just, the last thing they want to do is get in front of a screen again. So I understand that, and we're wrestling with that. And the other is we do have some older folks who are part of our congregation where technology really isn't their thing. So one of the things we're having to do now is we're bringing things back online, like small groups and other gatherings, right, that have traditionally been in person. Well, some of them have been gone virtual. Now they're kind of doing both. But what we have to do is we're putting together a kind of a technology kit for people. So how do you make your small group or your, whatever group you have, how do you make that a hybrid group so the people who've been dialing in with you from wherever can continue to be a part of your community when you guys are gathering back in person, right? Again, it's a good idea to be a hybrid church, but actually doing that is complicated.
It's a lot of work, but I think
it is a lot of work.
And I think it's wise that you're thinking about that and putting those kits together. Because it's like because really what to me with the digital is how are we giving people a new way to experience, and knowing that if we have another avenue that's not just coming to us in person at our building,
right,
that we're able to interact with more people. And so even though it's more work, it's open, it's not a sum zero game, if you will. It's not, it's opening us up to new people, or even some of our own people that travel a lot, or whatever, for work. I guess they're not doing that this last year, but they will again. And anyways, it's not a zero sum game, I guess. It's like we're opening ourselves up to new opportunities, which that excites me. But it is a lot of work.
Well,
right.
People, it's intimidating if you're not a technology person to set it up right in a way that actually works for audio and video. And it's not a distraction, because you know this to be true, Chris, that, technology is great, except when it's not working, right? And then it's just a hassle, it's a distraction, and you might as well just forget it, right? So it has to work and be seamless to be effective. And so, and that's a pretty big bar for some of our people. So we're trying our best to help them do that, again, because we want to be a hybrid church. We don't want to be in a place where we're forgetting about our digital congregation because we're back in person. Yeah. That's not the call the Lord has on us. So it's a both and kind of deal. And that's a pretty steep learning curve.
Yeah, no, you got me thinking about, how do we make it seamless for our volunteer leaders so that it just works? Anyways, that's probably a bigger conversation for another day. And unfortunately, we've reached that time, or at the end of time, not the end of time, that's a bit, it's a bit much for just the end of this podcast, I should say. It's all the time we have today, folks. I want to thank you, Ernie, for being our guest on How We Do Digital Ministry. I'd like to invite all of our listeners and viewers, make sure that you subscribe on YouTube or subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify, wherever you prefer to listen. Ernie, please tell our listeners how they can find you and follow you online.
You can certainly go to rejoicelutheran.org. Our website is there. You can find us also if you Google us, Rejoice Lutheran Coppell, which is Coppell, Texas. And you can certainly reach us through Instagram, YouTube channel. I'd like to say my Twitter handle, but I just don't use Twitter very much. So I don't have that route. But that said, connecting with us or my email, which is ernie@rejoicelutheran.org. We'd love to hear from you.
All right, we'll be sure to put all those in the show notes so that they can click on those links or your email and get a hold of you. So I'd also, to all of our listeners and viewers, like to invite you to connect with us in another way. We have a private Facebook group called How We Do Digital Ministry. This group is how we keep the conversation going between episodes. So you don't have to wait a whole nother 7 days to talk digital ministry. There's a link, join the Facebook group, and you can join several hundred other colleagues discussing all things digital ministry. Well, that's all for today. Blessings to you and peace.